All right, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangout. My name is John Mueller. I'm a Webmaster Trends analyst here at Google in Switzerland. And part of what I do is talk with webmasters and publishers like the folks here in the Hangout and the people who submitted questions. There are a handful of questions submitted already, but I heard there are already more people ready to ask questions here live in the Hangout. So let me try to run through the questions that we have here, and then we'll open it up for discussions. Let's see. So, OK. Working on a very large classified website with millions of listings expiring every month. Best practice for indexing and expired listings. 301 to parent category, 404 redirect to same listing or to a similar listing in the same category. So in general, what I would do there is just return 404 so that these listings kind of drop out over time. One thing you could do, depending on the model that you have on your site, is also use the unavailable after robots meta tag, which tells us ahead of time that this listing won't be available in the future. 301 redirecting to a category, for example, is something we'll probably pick up as a soft 404, so you wouldn't really have any advantage of doing that. I just make sure that the 404 page that you do has enough value for users so that when they come to an expired listing, they actually find their way around your website and maybe make it to one of the non-expired listings.
John, regarding that, if, for example, you just leave the listing even after it expired, would you still pick it up as a soft 404, for example?
Maybe. So if when we look at the listing, it looks like something that's invalid now, then we might assume that it has like an error text on the page. But if the listing is still up and it looks all the same, but you can't do anything with it, then that's really a bad user experience, and that's something I try to avoid.
What if, for example, the listing is still up, we show a message that the listing is not available anymore, here are a couple more listings that you could choose from the same category, for example?
That's probably something that would work for some extent, but what would happen is we just index all of these old pages, and we'd have trouble kind of focusing on the important stuff on your website. So right, yeah. What I've sometimes seen is sites kind of combine that and say we have this kind of soft 404 page for maybe a couple of weeks or a shorter period of time, and then you switch over to a hard 404 so that it really drops out everywhere.
Right, so when people are searching for something, Google makes sure that it shows relevant actual listings instead of expired ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, John. Question again about this. Some of these listings generate a lot of backlinks, so they might become popular or might go viral, and they generate yes, a lot of links back to them and quite a lot of traffic. So obviously for an SEO, it's 404ing those isn't great. Is there an alternative to that?
If you have an equivalent page that replaces the old one, that's something you could redirect to. But if these are like user-generated content listings, then it's really hard to know what the equivalent product is. So if you have an e-commerce site, for example, and one model of shoes kind of isn't available anymore, but the New Year's model is available, then that's something you could easily 301 redirect to. But if it's like something unique and you don't really have an equivalent replacement, then you don't really have anything to kind of redirect it to.
Okay, so basically it's the 404 is best practice in these cases.
Yeah.
And sometimes the users will then relist that item, so it's yes, it will expire after 30 days and it will be 404'd, but then after maybe 2 or 3 days or a week, they might relist it. So we would then change that to then just the 200, so just make it live again.
Sure, that works, yeah. Or redirect if it has a new URL, depending on how you have your system set up.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
Let's see. Here's one about content. I wonder how low-quality content has been identified in non-English languages. For example, language-specific algorithms. Are they strong enough to understand repeated grammar errors? I don't know. I don't know the specifics of how we would pick that up. I know we work really hard to make sure our algorithms work well across all languages, because that's the only way that we can realistically scale. To some extent, sometimes that works better than other times. But this is something where if you notice something specific in your language, and especially if it's a language that maybe Google doesn't speak that well, then that's really useful feedback to have. Sometimes the problem is also that there's just not enough great content in some of these languages. So if there's very little content in one language on a specific topic, and most of that is low-quality content, then that's kind of all we have to show to users who are searching for that information. So kind of taking that as an opportunity and saying, OK, I see there's a lot of low-quality content here. If I create something really fantastic on this topic for this language, then that's an opportunity for me. But all of these are really useful feedback to have. So if you have specific examples of queries or sites where you think we're getting it wrong, then by all means, send them our way.
John, can I step in with an additional question?
Sure.
So for the language declaration, if it's not declared on the actual page, is the hreflang within XMLS sitemap enough? Because over there, all the majority of the pages are declared with their own languages.
Yeah, so if you just have one language version, then the hreflang doesn't change anything. So if you have, like, all your pages are in English and you declare an hreflang, this is in English, then that doesn't help us because we don't have a pair of pages. But if you have multiple pages or one piece of content available in multiple languages, then the hreflang does help us to better understand that.
So it would be necessary to update also the language on each page, I mean, in the HTML.
The language on each page, so how do you mean?
To declare the language, you know, at the beginning of each page when you declare the HTML syntax?
Oh, we don't use that at all. So the language attribute for HTML or for bodies, all of that, we don't use that at all. Sometimes that's used for screen readers, though. So if you have a text that's in a specific language and you think screen readers might get confused with the pronunciation, then you can specify the language there. But we don't use that from our side. We try to focus on the hreflang and the language that we find on the page itself.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, would placing files within folders add any SEO benefit for a site? For example, domain.com/product-name compared to /category/product name. No, not necessarily. We essentially see these URLs as being unique URLs, and we take them as identifiers and not as something where we try to figure out what exactly this page is about. So I would use a URL structure that works well for you, that makes it easy for you to diagnose issues in specific parts of your site, and do it like that. So some people use parameters, some people use kind of this word-based URL patterns. That's really up to you. Could you ask someone on the analytics team to try to help filter spam referrals? Really annoying. Last I heard from people outside of Google that this was actually a lot better, but I can ping the analytics folks to see what they have there. I know they're always kind of working on that. Will Search Console ever be linked to YouTube partner accounts videos, not just YouTube channel page, so that we can gauge what people search on Google too, not just on YouTube searches? I can't make predictions about what will happen in the future, but I kind of looked into this a little bit with our Webmaster Central YouTube channel to see what we could potentially get out of that. And the difficulty there is, of course, that per channel you don't have this folder structure on YouTube. All YouTube videos are essentially in the same thing. So it's a lot easier, a lot harder to actually figure out what kind of search queries would go to these specific video URLs. But I can definitely pass that on to the team to see if maybe there's some way to make that work after all. A related question, Googlers regularly talk about experimenting with algorithm changes live. Is there a set of test sites used? Who does the testing and what impact on the sites is involved in testing? In general, we don't have a limited set of test sites for something like this because the web is just evolving all the time. So we try to do things like 1% launches to see what happens when we redirect a small portion of the traffic to a specific change. We try to run experiments across pretty much all users to see how the general reaction is to these changes. So it's not really limited to a number of sites, because I think that would artificially skew things a little bit if there were this kind of fixed set of sites that everything is judged against. In the process of redesigning refinements panel on a classified site, the site is responsive on the redesigned version when viewed on a mobile. The refinement links would not be accessible, while on desktop they would. What's the best practice? So I guess from my point of view, I would make sure that it works best on mobile. That's something which sounds a bit, I guess, paradox, but pretty much everything that we work on nowadays when we try to create mocks for new features, we mock them out, we build them out on mobile, and essentially kind of expand that version for the desktop version. But ideally, all of this should work on mobile. If you think it's an important feature for your site, then people are going to want to use it on their phones. So make sure that it actually does work on mobile.
John,
yes.
Can I just ask a question about that?
Sure.
So the site is mobile responsive, and it is built for mobile. And the problem here is our developers are looking into the accessibility of the pages on a for a bot. Essentially, when it's on a mobile view, the refinements they want to handle the refinements differently to how they'll be handled on desktop. So it's a dynamic, in a way, solution. It's a mix between dynamic and responsive. And I'm not entirely sure how best we should act here. I'm assuming the best practice is to have the same accessibility for desktop and mobile, because mobile bot will want to crawl the mobile version, or the responsive sites as well.
So if you use responsive or dynamic serving or separate mobile URLs, it's essentially up to you. It's something that you can also mix, where you say, well, part of my website is fully responsive and part of it adjusts to the user agent to make sure that we can serve them properly. From my point of view, I just really make sure that everything works on mobile as well. If it's an important feature, make sure that it's available somehow on mobile so that people can actually use it like that. It's not so much, let's say, from an SEO point of view, but more from a usability point of view, and just from looking at the amount of traffic that's out there on mobile, where we easily see half of the web traffic with mobile devices. So if it's important, make sure it works on mobile.
Okay, great. My question was really specifically about accessibility, and if we're creating a version which isn't accessible when viewed on a mobile and not crawlable, that I'm going to be facing issues.
So I guess what would happen there is we wouldn't be able to match on a per URL basis the desktop to the mobile pages. So what would happen there is, for those pages that we wouldn't have this kind of one-to-one mapping, we would just see them as being desktop pages, and we wouldn't show the mobile-friendly label in the search results for them. But if you have part of your site like that and part of your site that is fully mobile-friendly, then that's perfectly fine.
Okay, great. Thanks.
We're receiving hundreds of backlinks from a tool called Agent Marketing. It creates template websites for homes for sale for our realtor partners, and our link is built into the template with the same alt text for hundreds of pages. Is this bad for SEO? That sounds like a weird kind of link scheme that you probably want to discourage these people from actually creating those kind of sites if they're done for you specifically. A simple way to kind of handle that if you don't want that to happen is to put those domains in a disavow file so that any of the links that we find from there are essentially ignored. Is server speed a small ranking factor or a large one? I keep trying to convince customers not to go on a shared platform, but a dedicated server for good customer experience, but cost can get in the way. So I guess there are two aspects here. When you look at server speed, on the one hand, there's the kind of perceived speed in the browser, the time it takes to render a page. And that's something that is definitely a ranking factor. It's probably not the biggest ranking factor. And usually we try to differentiate between sites that are really slow and sites that are kind of normal. So just like optimizing on a millisecond basis isn't going to affect anything in the search results. But obviously, the faster you make your site, the more people are going to stay on your site, the more they're going to do on your website, the more they tend to recommend it to other people. So indirectly, that is definitely a factor. The other part of server speed is more with regards to crawling, so how quickly we can crawl pages from your website. And that's not directly a ranking factor, but it does affect how quickly we can pick up new and changed content on your site. So, for example, if you're a news website and we can't crawl your website quick enough, then we might miss out on some of the news articles that you put out, and that could be something where you kind of lose visibility compared to competitors who we can crawl a little bit faster. So that's kind of something to keep in mind there. On the other hand, if this is a static site that's going to stay the same for maybe a couple of years, it's more an informational site, the content will stay the same, then even if we can't crawl it that quickly, that's not going to affect anything in search because we're not going to be missing out on any updates that you put out there. Okay, RankBrain. Is RankBrain's query processing used by organic results only, or any parts shared with other widgets like images, shopping, etc.? I don't know. So my guess would be here that this is still a fairly new technology, but it's in general at Google we try to kind of reuse the technology building blocks and use them in other places as well. So specifically around machine learning, that's something where that tool set can be reused for various other products as well. So that could apply to different parts of search, that could apply to completely different products that have their own search or that don't even use search at all, that try to figure out like what should we show on these category pages. So in general, like the machine learning toolkit is something that we would use like any other tools within Google. When will the Maps API be fixed? I don't have any insight on the Maps API, so I can't really help with that. Let's say I improve the quality of my site overall, and users do notice how often does Google recalculate the overall score for my website, every week, every 2 weeks, monthly, or every 3 months. It's really hard to say because some algorithms at Google are updated essentially in real time as we get more information. Others are updated more in batches, and sometimes these kind of play in together. So it's not something where I would say there would ever be a fixed time frame that we would give out for any specific algorithm, because that can also change over time. And sometimes that's kind of an interplay with multiple parts of different algorithms. So for example, if you change something on your website, we might be able to process that in real time, but that's based on when we actually crawl those pages and when we re-index those pages. So the algorithm reacts in real time, but it might take maybe half a year for us to actually recrawl those pages so that we can react. So because of all of these kind of interplaying factors, it's really hard to give any specific timeline on any specific change. Andre mentioned that old factors when discussing crawl budget with Eamon in the webinar. Am I able to ask if the factors for crawl budget are not just page rank and speed, for example, freshness and change frequency? You can always ask. Nothing against asking. But I guess in general, we try to figure out what makes sense for crawling. So there's definitely a limitation on the speed of the server, like how much we can crawl from a website. That's kind of like the upper cap. We can't really go past that. But for most websites, we're still in a good range where we say, well, what we're crawling is not at the upper cap of what we can crawl for this server. So we kind of have room to go forward a little bit, crawl a little bit more, sometimes crawl a little bit less, depending on what all we find. And things like freshness and change frequency can play a role there, where if we notice that a page is changing frequently, we might crawl it more often. That doesn't mean, however, that we'll rank it higher, because just because we're crawling it doesn't mean that we'll actually show it higher in rankings. Other things that might play a role in there as well is when, for example, we recognize broad changes across the website, where we assume that maybe this change applies to the whole website. Then maybe we'll try to recrawl more of the website a little bit faster to kind of pick up that change in a faster way. That usually comes into play when you're doing something like a site move, where if we recognize that it looks like you're doing a site move, we'll try to crawl a little bit faster to actually process that a little bit faster.
John.
Yes.
Sorry, that was my question. Can I just ask another quick thing as well?
Sure.
The other week, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this because it was on Twitter. So the other week, I think it was Tony Dimmock who said something about when a site goes offline, sometimes it can take a few days for it to... Sorry, that's my phone. Sorry, apologies. Stupid thing. Yeah, so when a site goes offline, it can take quite a while for it to come back up. Yeah. And you said if we recognise the important pages of a website, we'll try to crawl them a bit faster to bring it back up. Yeah, those pages back up. So I've got this thing about page URL importance. Yeah, so it seems that budget is almost like more to do with just overall importance of pages as such. Yeah. So, but that's it seemed to imply that if it gets crawled faster and it's an important page, it's just the word you said will bring it back up a bit quicker.
Yeah, so I guess that's specifically around pages that drop out of the index because of errors. So that's something, for example, if we notice that the home page kind of drops out, then we'll try to recrawl that home page a little bit more than random other pages on the website, just to make sure that we pick up those changes a little bit faster, to make sure that the important stuff is really back online for that site a little bit faster.
Right, okay, yeah. There's one other quick thing as well. So I was going through some, I know everybody likes rooting through patents, yeah. So I was looking through some that were around like crawl scheduling, and I was looking also at some old stuff around Matt's famous conversation with Eric about crawl budget. And I think one of the things that I was interested in was that I think it was either Matt or one of the patents that referred to pages that are duplicate content. So say you're crawling lots of pages and they are near or exact duplicates, yeah. So I think it was Matt who said if we find 3 of the pages that are the same, yeah, we'll crawl one, we'll start to recognize that this is a pattern, yeah. This is duplicate. So on a massive, say, dynamic e-commerce site where really all you've got is a tiny bit of a change, and maybe even they've done some stuff with like randomization just to try and make Google think that this is really a changing page, when really it's like it's not. It's just on load rand type thing. So does that sort of behavior start Google thinking that maybe this is not a site that is massively to be trusted? If you do that, will you get less of a crawl, for instance, if you have lots and lots of duplicate pages that are dynamically driven? Yeah.
It kind of depends. So I guess with regards to trust, it's worth really separating the crawling from the actual ranking side. So if we see that there's a lot of duplication within a website, that doesn't mean that we won't rank the content that we do find there. So that's something definitely worth separating, and I think that's something that a lot of people kind of tie together in that they think, oh, if I get Google to crawl more of my website, then I'll rank higher, and that's really not necessarily the case. With regards to duplication, we primarily try to figure out where we're crawling into an area that's essentially an infinite space of URLs, where we could crawl forever but not actually find anything useful anymore. And that's easy to recognize afterwards. If you've crawled a million URLs and you see, oh, 90% of these were actually pretty useless, but it's kind of tricky to recognize while you're actually crawling. So before you go off and crawl those million URLs. And that's a part of what the people on the crawling team do, is they try to figure out where do we need to crawl more, where do we need to recognize patterns and say, well, this pattern looks like a calendar, and we're already in the year 29,000, so maybe we don't need to crawl more of that. And we have whole teams at Google that focus on this, so it's not something that's really easily trivialized into just one or two factors.
Right, okay, all right. I think, am I right to assume that the most important thing, though, is that when you've got a massive site, you indicate to Google very clearly that these are the important pages?
Sure, yeah.
Via things like internal linking and, relationship linking, etc., that kind of thing. Just point out, well, these are my votes from inside my website, if you like.
Sure, yeah. And the clearer all of those signals are, the easier we can follow them. So if you have consistent internal linking, that's something that really helps us to understand, well, these are really URLs within your website, not just random session IDs or something crazy that we don't really have to worry about. So the clearer things like the sitemap aligns with the internal linking and all of that kind of comes together, then the easier we can focus on just those URLs with unique content, and we don't get sidetracked by stuff that's essentially not worth indexing or crawling separately.
But also, sorry, I'm going to not ask any more after this. I'm just going to be a watcher. So things like a HTML front-facing sitemap. Do you remember the other week that Barry said, is it really worth having it? It was just on these searching around table. So for me, something like that is actually really useful because it indicates to Googlebot and users, these are the most important pages. So say you've got a massive website. Am I right in thinking that? So actually there is a use to it. It's like these are the priorities as such.
I think it really depends on the website. So for some websites that might be useful. In general, I'd assume that the normal navigation with the website is clear enough that people are able to recognize the primary categories, the most important pages anyway. So I'm kind of torn with regards to HTML sitemaps.
But that's kind of assuming that, say you're like a massive, huge, I don't know, say you're Tesco, yeah, or John Lewis, or one of the huge retailers. Those websites can have something like 10, 20 million index URLs, yeah. So if you've got a huge mega menu, then obviously that kind of acts almost like a site-wide mini sitemap in a way, doesn't it? A little bit, yeah?
Yeah.
As long as you've not got all the same content across.
Yeah, I mean, in a case like that, you wouldn't have all of the products listed in the menu. You'd have the categories, maybe subcategories.
That's the point. But if you haven't got a mega menu and you have got a big site, a sitemap might be useful for that.
Well, I think if it's like an HTML sitemap, then users aren't going to be able to navigate through like a million links and find the thing they're looking for. They're going to want to go through like category and subcategories as well. But so I think in a case like that, if it's like really big, then an HTML sitemap for everything doesn't really provide a lot of value.
But that's my point. Sorry, I'm not making myself very clear. I'm kind of trying to say that the use of them is that you're saying these are the most important categories as such, yeah. So rather than having every product, etc., on there, you would literally have the main categories. It's kind of saying that ultimately the best crawl is just to show the important stuff.
Yeah,
Is what I'm saying.
I'm torn. Sometimes I think that's a good idea. For some other sites, it's really essentially redundant compared to the normal navigation. But it's not at the point where I would say this doesn't make sense or you cause any problems with it. If you think it does make sense for your website, if it works for users, then definitely go ahead and set something like that up.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John. Cheers.
Sure. All right, now we come to the more important questions. Can the Google Matrix detect tolls in driving mode? I don't know. I don't know how that actually works, like the self-driving car. When will GTM have A/B testing function? I also don't know about the tag manager, so I can't help you with that. My client site is penalized by Google. Any suggestions? What I do there is maybe ask in the help forums and get some tips from people who have experience with different kinds of penalties and kind of manual actions to get input on what you would need to do to actually clean that up. Obviously, if you post in the help forum on behalf of your client, maybe get their permission so that they're not surprised when they see their URL somewhere on the internet being discussed. Is it a good practice to give 404 to URLs that don't seem to generate okay-ish web analytics metrics? In a case, a massive part of a site is like this, you decide to 404 a lot of content. Would that be an issue? A lot of 404s are always fine. We see this as a technical means, a technical method on your website. So I wouldn't limit myself to like the number of 404s you can do. With regards to 404ing content that you think is maybe lower quality, that's certainly up to you. If you feel that this isn't something that reflects the quality of your website really well, then maybe 404 it, maybe no index it. That's always an option. I recently started with Google Tag Manager. Yeah, again, I can't really help with Tag Manager. I'd go to the analytics or the AdWords forums for that. I'm not sure if there's a specific forum for the Tag Manager directly. Do 404 pages need to be indexed to... Wait, do 404 pages need to be indexed to the bot to find those pages as 404? In other words, do we need to set up metadata as index follow or no index follow? So if a page returns a 404, then we don't look at anything on the page. We don't look at things like the robots meta tag. We essentially drop those pages from our index as we recognize that this is kind of like the steady state. So you don't need to put any meta tags on a 404 page. If it returns 404, then that's essentially what we're looking for. Sometimes what does happen is that people set up 404 pages that don't return 404, and for us that's a bit of a problem because it looks like there might be content there and we might try to index that. So instead of trying to fix that with a no index on there, I just make sure that your server really returns 404 for URLs that don't exist. All right. Wow. Lots of time for more questions. Who wants to get started?
Can I ask a question about non-ASCII characters, please, in URLs?
Okay.
So I've got a client's non-ASCII characters in the URL. They're mainly pipes. I've just split out the parameters. Now, there's been an attempt in the robots.txt to block them. Now, the non-ASCII characters get converted to, I think, %7c. Those are the characters they get converted to. Now, our own crawler shows that they are blocked in robots.txt, but when we use the Webmaster Tools tester, whether we base it on the ASCII character URL or the non-ASCII character URL, it's saying that both are allowed, and we're not too sure if the robots.txt file is working, considering a lot of pages are in the index, but they might have been in the index already. So I don't know what your what would your suggestion be there.
I'd love to have an example. If
Oh yeah, I
you
can
can send
provide
me
you.
a link, a URL of one that you think should be blocked, then I can double check with the team to see what actually is happening there. I think it's kind of tricky if you use non-standard delimiters between parameters, because then we can't figure out how these parameters actually work. So with normal parameters, we understand that like the order is irrelevant, and we can learn with the parameter setting in Search Console how to like swap them out or kind of keep them or replace them with a default value. But if you use non-standard delimiters, then that's really tricky for us to figure out.
Even if it gets converted and the final example has the
Yeah.
the characters in there.
I can, let me
I've,
just copy this onto the side so that
I've
I
included in
can
it
look at it later. Yeah.
um, because we're not sure, you see, and obviously we're trying to make every effort to block all these URLs because all parameter driven. They're all based, on, I think, on the fastest search. So it's just bizarre, and we were wondering whether or not we've got allow : / and the as a directive, and we're wondering whether or not that has anything to do with it or not. But yeah, provided you an example there, so I don't know.
Yeah. Let me just double check something really quick.
Yeah.
Feel free to go ahead with the next question if you have
Okay.
another one. Oh wow, your robot's text file is crazy. Like all those asterisks. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
See, this was set up before we came along, so we're just starting to look at it now, and we're just, I suppose, just trying to understand exactly what's going on there.
I assume that you're kind of being over specific there. And probably what you'd need to do in the robot's text file is to use the unescaped characters instead of the escaped version.
Okay.
But that's something that you can kind of easily test with the robot's text testing tool.
Right.
Just like swap out some lines of the robot's text and test the same URL again to see what actually is happening there.
Okay. I'll make a note.
I suspect this one is kind of an edge case where maybe theoretically it should go this way or that way, but because of all the wildcards in there, I imagine it's really hard to kind of make this deterministic in the sense that it always does the same thing. So this is the kind of thing where when I see this in a robot's text file, I recommend generally to try to simplify it so that it's not so complicated, so that anyone who looks at this file later on will understand, oh, they're doing this specifically and that affects these URLs, rather than to kind of essentially make it so that everyone has to guess what this means.
Okay, so we're just saying its current form, then it's not really doing what it needs to do. It's not working at the minute.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it works like this, but it's such a complicated setup with like the multiple asterisks in the same line that it's really, really hard to figure out exactly what you're trying to do.
Right.
On the one hand, from our side with our algorithms, on the other hand, from your side as well, if anyone has to maintain that file.
Yeah. Okay, I'll make some notes and I'll let you know how we get on. My other question was around Search Console. So say if you change the geo-targeting to say US, for example, and then I set up Webmaster Tools again for a specific folder that's going to target the French users. Does the original geo-targeting domain level, does that still work? I mean, what happens there when we set up geo-targeting to different countries for the same site? How does that work?
We try to split it up so that the most specific rule kind of wins. So if you have a subfolder, so if you have your domain set up for US and you have a subdirectory set for France, then that subdirectory for France would be just French. So it wouldn't be like a mix of US and French. It would be just for France. And the rest of your site, based on the generic version, essentially would be the US.
Okay, and it's always advisable to set up a separate Webmaster Tools if you wanted to kind of achieve that, or?
Yeah, so if you want to split up the site, you have to do it like that.
Yeah.
You can't, like, within one entry say, well, subdirectories or subdomains or whatever. You have to set those up separately in Search Console.
Okay, excellent. That's a tip for now. I'll let someone else ask. John?
Perfect. All right. More questions.
I'll go ahead with some.
All right.
So you talked earlier about structure and how Google kind of doesn't rely on URLs to understand the structure of a website. Do you use breadcrumbs more or less, or do you just rely on internal linking?
We mostly rely on internal linking. Breadcrumbs is something that we'd use for the snippets, so when we show it in the search results. But I think for the structure of a website, we mostly rely on kind of internal linking. Yeah, that's pretty much mostly what we look at there.
John, how do you tell what is a breadcrumb and what isn't?
What is a breadcrumb?
Well, because we fake ours in the US site, we don't pull from, because we have a flat hierarchy. So we fake the breadcrumbs for users because we have different ways to show things. So if we've got an experience, you know what we sell. If we have a skydiver that's in New York, the next step up could be New York, or it could be all skydiving. So we just we assign each product to two categories depending on what we think is best for the user, and we display those as breadcrumbs, but they're not really hierarchical breadcrumbs. So is there a way that Google can tell what's a breadcrumb and what isn't on a flat structure, or because they don't really exist today?
So if you have strong feelings about which breadcrumb you want, you can definitely mark it up. You can use the schema.org markup for that.
Can you use schema? Okay.
Yeah. So that's essentially if you know what the hierarchy should be or that you prefer to have, you can set that up. If we just find it on the page, then I don't know how we would differentiate between like picking which set of breadcrumbs to actually use. It's right. Possible that sometimes we'll pick one and sometimes we'll pick the other. I don't know.
So your breadcrumbs are a strict folder structure, then?
No, not so much folder structure, but kind of based on what we find on the pages. So a lot of times breadcrumbs will have a standard format. There's like a dotted list or something like that, right. Just items next to each other. And if we recognize that this kind of structure works on that website, we'll try to pull that out of the page itself. But again, if you have it marked up with schema.org, then we would have something better to pull out.
Okay, we could do that then.
Put it from the.
Because there's always two ways to go back. You could go back to all t-shirts or all men's, or it depends how you navigate through. Then you could just go back via the same navigation, or you could just pick what you think's best.
Yeah, I've seen sites that also dynamically do this, like based on a cookie, where if you go down through t-shirts, then the next breadcrumb back up is t-shirts again. But
if you come via men's, then it goes back up via.
Yeah. Right. But for crawling, of course, we don't have a cookie. So you essentially, if you want to show a breadcrumb trail, then you just pick whichever one you think makes sense and show that.
Okay.
I got one more regarding e-commerce websites. So you talked about this, I think, in the last Hangout. Somebody asking for tips on how to kind of improve e-commerce websites. And since most e-commerce websites, have products that maybe have the same description as many other e-commerce websites, you suggest that the website should focus on bringing some unique value to the users in some way. We do that mostly by creating very in-depth guides, for example, or maybe something that's newsworthy. And the idea is, so let's say we have a site that sells blue widgets, and we make a very in-depth guide on how to use blue widgets, how blue widgets work with whatever you have, or your personality, or something else. And it's a very useful resource. The resource itself actually got some links as well, got some exposures on other websites. And the idea is that for the blue widgets query, we're now ranking with that guide like in the top 3 positions, which is very nice. But we would rather like to rank with the category Blue Widgets page, like all the other websites. So from an SEO point of view, is there some way to direct Google other than simply internal linking from that article maybe to kind of make the category more relevant so it shows up in the search result?
Not that easily. So like you mentioned, the internal linking is definitely something that helps. But if this guide is kind of what makes your website relevant for that query, then we'll try to show that in the search results, because that's what makes your website relevant. So that's something where you kind of have to piggyback off of that and say, well, the guide is actually what's relevant, what people are finding and what they're clicking on, maybe reading. And from there, we just have to make it clear that actually it's not just about information here. We also have this section where you can buy these things directly too.
Okay, and do you kind of are you trying to guess whether the intent, this general intent, somebody just searching for Blue Widgets and that's it, is more commercial or informational in nature, in trying to show up results that are more informational or commercial?
Yeah, sometimes that's easier, and sometimes that's not so easy. So it really is something that could also evolve over time, where we say, well, at the moment, this is a very commercial query, but maybe this product makes it into the news somehow, and everyone is talking about this product, and when they search for it, they actually want to find news articles about it. So that's the kind of thing that can shift over time, and it kind of guides what kind of content we show in the search results for those queries. So it can change, yeah.
Well, I'm asking because all of the other 9 results for that query are category pages from other websites with products, and we're the only informational type of page that's showing up. And it's showing up very highly, and that's very good, but obviously it's more conversion friendly to show up with a category page instead.
Yeah, I don't know. The easy answer from me would be to make your category pages more relevant, but I don't know how easily that is kind of put into place and saying, okay, I will make my category pages more relevant. That's like kind of a high goal sometimes.
But generally speaking, using internal linking from the article that is showing up towards the category page, does that help? Is
Sure,
that a good?
Sure, that helps.
Okay.
That definitely helps us to understand the connection there. I mean, this is something that you could also see as like potentially people are coming to this page for informational reasons, and you want to kind of fulfill their need there, but you could maybe think about doing something like a small banner on top or on the side where you say, well, this is the information, but actually if you want to buy it, we have a shop available here too where you can get all of this too. So I mean, maybe at the moment you're the only site that fulfills this kind of informational need, and that's kind of why we show you those pages there. So if we were to switch to your category page, maybe your site wouldn't be as relevant there compared to the rest. So I try to use that rather than to break that connection and force a category page to be shown.
Okay, thanks.
John, can I just ask another? Sorry, I know I promised I wouldn't ask any more questions, but it's really a quick one. So say you have, say you've taken a project that has legacy architectural issues. So say it's just been built wrong, if you like, it's custom built, yeah. You can address that via internal linking, can't you? Rather than having to break it effectively and rebuild it, yeah. Say it's quite a long established website, you can address it, can't you, almost by restructuring some internal linking systems. That makes sense, yeah? You can go a long way towards it.
Sometimes. I mean, it depends on how it's broken and what all you can easily do. Sometimes it's possible to kind of clean up the URL structure and have a big effect that way. Sometimes it's just the way that the site is built is really hard to kind of tweak and to fix like that. But it really depends on how things are broken there.
But if possible, if you had a choice, would you choose to really only start breaking URLs that are not that bad, really? Yeah, it's more from a kind of a depth that it's built too deep, you know, like subcategories of subcategories of subcategories, etc. So it's almost like things are really hard to find, yeah, for Google bot, yeah, and probably people as well. So would really your last choice be to start breaking URLs, and then you end up with all these like redirects? And I know that you can like just have one redirect, but then it gets complicated because over time somebody else says, hey, why don't we redirect again? And you end up with this whole like htaccess file with like redirect chains, and somebody leaves, and you know what I mean? It gets messy, doesn't it, really?
Yeah. It's really hard to make a judgment call between like starting over, essentially kind of making a fresh new site based on the same content, and tweaking an existing site. I think you can certainly go a long way by cleaning up URLs, folding things together, which does involve a lot of redirects sometimes. But sometimes it also makes sense to say, well, trying to fix this structure of a site that's really kind of old and crufty and maybe runs on an old framework, and the server, you never know how long it will be supported, takes actually more effort than going back and saying, okay, we'll completely recreate a new website based on the old content with maybe a new URL structure, where we'll have to figure out a mapping from the old URLs to the new ones, which can be very complicated, but you kind of have a cleaner structure to build on for the future. So making the decision between like tearing everything down and starting over fresh and trying to patch up an existing framework is really hard sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks. I just wondered what your thoughts were on it, really. Thank you.
Sure.
John, can I just ask a quick question about canonicals?
Sure.
Can you just use the double slash without the protocol? I know we spoke about absolute and relative URLs before, but could you just have that without the protocol? And if you do have to have the protocol, do you have to have it if you do you have to declare it if you're going to redirect the preferred protocol anyway, if that makes sense?
You can always use it without a protocol if you think that makes sense. Sometimes that helps when you have like a development site and you want to test it without HTTPS first because you don't have the certificate set up. So that's a good situation to do it like that. If you're trying to really clean up a canonicalization issue and you have a mix of HTTPS and non-HTTPS content, then sometimes specifying the protocol makes sure that we really focus on the version that you want. But if you've already kind of picked HTTPS or HTTP and the rest of your site is in there, then not specifying a protocol is fine.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks, John.
Sometimes that's also like a first step that people do when they move to HTTPS, in that they'll clean everything up and make sure that it doesn't have a protocol, so that when you switch things over, then essentially the rest of the site just continues working.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought about it again from a, if you're basically telling Google this is the preferred URL, and the HTTP and HTTPS difference. But like, say if you've picked one, then you will make that as.
I can't really hear you. Somehow you're breaking up.
Perfect timing then.
All right, go for it, Rob.
Well, I was just going to ask the usual, really, John, to see if there was any update on our things. Since we're in the last 5 minutes.
Don't have any news for you at the moment, sorry.
That was quick then. I literally don't have any other questions today other than that.
Okay.
I can think of them, but they'll all be related to the same thing.
Okay. No.
Sorry, I know that I'm back again. Can I just ask another really quick one? Yeah.
Sure.
It's actually more of a clarification, this, because you know the other week when we were speaking about on mouse over, and I think that it was, well, it was, for me, it was written up as almost like it was misinterpreted the conversation. Can you clarify that? I know what you meant, but it's just that there was a little bit of misunderstanding on a bit of the blog post where people were saying, oh, well, our alt's ignored, our title tag's ignored. Really, my question was to you, JavaScript events are basically just ignored. That's it. Yeah. So can you just clarify, for the purposes of anybody who may have read that blog post, that the conversation was really not about that? Yeah. And it was, and just explain the difference, the alts and the titles, etc. So from your point of view, yeah.
I'm not sure which blog post you mean, but in general, the main problem with events on a website is that Googlebot tends not to trigger them. So when we look at a page, we essentially load it normally. We don't scroll through the page. We don't click on things on the page. We don't hover over things on the page. So anything that happens specifically tied to an event, we don't actually notice. So I think that's probably what you were getting at there, in the sense that if it's tied to the event, then we probably don't pick it up. There's, I guess, a little bit of a caveat there where if we can recognize what's supposed to happen and it's all like in the same JavaScript file, in the same HTML page, then sometimes we can pull that out. So, for example, if there's a link to a URL that only gets shown with onHover, but that link is visible within the source code directly, then sometimes we'll pick up that URL and say, okay, it looks like it might be referring to a URL here. We'll try to crawl that URL anyway. We won't pass PageRank because we don't know how it's tied in on the page, but it's a new URL that we found, so we'll try to crawl that. But in general, if you have text on a page, if you have content that kind of gets shown or hidden with JavaScript, with mouse over or in CSS or anything like that, then that's something that potentially we wouldn't be able to pick up on.
So I think also the other part of that was that it was around images, if you remember. You probably don't, but anyway, it was around images. So image alts, yeah, that has text within it, yeah, and title has. So there is an attribute image title, yeah, which also has text within it, yeah. That text and the alt text and the title text of an image, if Googlebot can see them, that's included in the source code and content on the page, isn't it? That's it.
I'm not so sure about title. I think someone else also said that we don't use that, but alt attributes we definitely kind of include on the page, and we'd use that as metadata for the image itself. So in image search, if you search for that, we'd understand, well, this is somehow related to that image.
But the title, maybe not.
I don't think we actually use the title, but I'm not 100% sure, and some of that might change over time. So
you just ignore it.
As far as I know, we don't use it. But don't take my word for it. This is something that's kind of easy to test as well. If you put it on a page, you can make up a word and see if it starts ranking for that word based on the title that you have specified there.
But by just putting a title on a page, it'll have to be something really random, wouldn't it, for it just to start ranking for some random title?
Yeah, I mean, this is you're not really like creating spam or anything crazy like that. So this is something where I think it's useful as an SEO to try things out and see what actually does get picked up and what doesn't get picked up.
Okay, I'll have a look at that then. Right. Okay. Thanks, John. Cheers. Thanks.
Sure. All right. So.
Business app, sorry. This is a real quick one. Google My Business app, you can update your opening times. Does this take precedence over any schema?
Oh, you're breaking up again.
Can you hear me now?
But I think you're asking like which opening hours we use, like on your page or in the My Business apps. And
Yes. Yeah, basically.
that's always well contested. Sometimes I hear people discuss saying like one should take over precedence of the other, but from my point of view, if you're the person who's putting this out, just make sure it's as consistent as possible. So if you have control over the website, over the business, put the same hours on the website as you have in the app, and then we don't have to worry about which ones are real, which ones are broken.
No, that's fine. I think it's just in situations like you might not necessarily have a developer that can do it for you, and it's all hard coded up. So
yeah,
but that's cool. I'll Thanks, John.
All right. Okay, so let's take a break here. Been great having you all here again. I'm going to be on vacation in 2 weeks, so probably not in 2 weeks, but maybe we can do one next week to kind of catch up if anything crazy happens. You never know. I mean, at least I don't have anything planned to kind of cause any kind of craziness, but we'll see.
That's a hint.
I mean, there's always something that happens.
Don't be trying to backtrack on what you just said there, John. People are blogging about it.
Oh my gosh.
Things are going to happen.
I shouldn't have said anything. No, I mean, things always change in search, so depending on what happens. So with that, I'd like to wish you all a great weekend, and maybe we'll see each other again in one of the future Hangouts.
Okay. Bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
All.
Bye, John.